Hello, everyone, and welcome to the O-Lift podcast, where we discuss educational and relevant topics about Olympic weightlifting. My name is Anton Jefferson.
And I'm JP Nicoletta. Based on the news that we just learned, you will figure out the topic pretty quickly. Let me read this for you. June 9th, an article from Around the Rings, I believe, is the source where this came from. Let me just read this. It'll take a minute. International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach says changes to the Olympic program in 2024 may have to be made if the International Weightlifting Federation cannot curb its doping. The IOC chief says the summer 2024 sports program will feature all of the same 28 sports that were contested at the Rio 2016 Games, but with the caveat that all 28 international federations must remain in good standings with the Olympic Charter. Bach singled out the International Weightlifting Federation and the recent rash of doping positives from retests of the Beijing 2008 and London 2012 Olympic weightlifters during his press conference in Lausanne on June 9th. By the way, I think that number is 45 lifters, 30 of which were medalists. Got popped on the retests. All right. So in quotes, the IOC executive board has set an additional condition for this sport, weightlifting. Bach said that means that the IWF has until December 2017 to deliver a satisfactory report to the IOC on how they will address the massive doping problems this sport is facing. While the announcement puts the sport's Olympic future in doubt, its Olympic president also took a hit at the IOC EB meeting. The IOC announced cutbacks to the athlete quotas in some sports to promote gender equality. Weightlifting was one of the federations hit hardest by the cutbacks, losing 64 athlete allocations. Quote, "We have also already sent a very strong signal to IWF with regards to the program at 2020 by reducing the quota of athletes by 64 athletes for weightlifting in the program for Tokyo 2020, Bach said. Bach did note that the IWF has taken some positive steps in recent months to regain the confidence of the IOC. Quote, "The last General Assembly of the IWF has already approved some measures, and then we will see how they will favor and develop their plans and what ideas they have for implementation. Then we will take our decision in all this, so you should never forget, in all this time, the IWF was declared compliant by WADA with the World Anti-Doping Code, and there were some efforts already being undertaken, and we are looking for more. The IWF now has 6 months to implement further changes and remain on the Olympic program." So that means if we do not kneel, article's over, by the way, if we do not kneel before the gods of the IOC and beg them to accept whatever it is that we present, saying that we're getting our house in order as a sport, we could be out for 2020, we could be out for 2024. If we're in for 2020, we've lost 25% of our athlete allocation. Mm-hmm. That's what that 64 athletes amounts to. Mm-hmm. And on the heels of the sport announcing gender equality by adding the new weight class, the 90 kilo plus 90 kilo weight classes, what the IOC has now said is you can have your equality, but it's not going to be 8 and 8. You need to drop a men's weight class. So that's another disaster, because with all of the changes that the sport just made with the new weight categories, they're going to have to make a decision on what to do next. Mm-hmm. Because we don't have 8 men's weight classes. We don't have 8 classes, period, on either gender heading into 2020 if we're still alive.
Wow.
The hammer has fallen, so to speak,
hard
on weightlifting and in regard to drug use. So It's a mess.
Yeah, this is a very complex situation. And just to be clear, this is a global situation. So this is not just, obviously, a lot of countries in the Eastern Bloc have been a huge part of those doping scandals and so forth. This isn't singling out one country for doing bad things. This is the entire sport is in jeopardy.
Personally, my eyes always want to go to the Russian nations in Eastern Europe, but it's not. You're right.
Yes.
I mean, especially on the retests, it is all over the place. It's Asia. It's
exactly.
It's not good.
And one of the things that I think that we need to do before, especially as coaches and people in the sport, is pointing the finger going to help us get anywhere. So again, when we looked at the retest, before the retest, if you asked anybody who knew anything about weightlifting, it was Mother Russia is the enemy. It's quite interesting to see that spread about a little bit on the retest.
Well, the retests were one thing. And yeah, I mean, part of the reason it's so easy to roll Russia off the tongue, if you will, is that when a lot of this stuff was going on, the retest stuff in particular, I felt like weightlifting was getting away kind of scot-free. It felt like we were getting lucky, particularly leading into the Olympics. So if you roll it back, there were all of those drug pops that happened in 2015 when the worlds were in the United States, right?
Yeah.
Part of that storyline, I felt like, okay, well, testing is real on U.S. soil, and this is what happens.
Yeah.
The sport actually is policing seriously. Not necessarily a horrible story, right?
No.
But then the retest came out.
My interpretation of the matter of the whole situation is that weightlifting, the IWF is taking, matters into their own hands to clean up some things. Are they doing enough?
You thought so?
I thought, well, think about it. Who are some big players that are out who have been stripped?
Irrelevant. How did they get caught? They got caught on the retest, the big players. Okay. That wasn't IWF. And if you think about IWF and the rhetoric and the stuff that they put out on their website, the commitment to clean sport and so the commitment to
a facade.
Isn't it? You know what it sort of strings up in my head? It might be a little dating you a little bit, but do you remember the original Desert Storm?
Yeah.
Do you remember the first Iraqi war?
My uncle fought in it.
Okay. I don't know if you remember one of the news lines back then, but there was a character, if you will. He became a character, but he was like the Iraqi, I don't know, information minister or something. The media eventually started calling him Baghdad Bob.
Oh,
and it was like, he was originally giving press releases saying, "Oh, Americans aren't here. They're running away in terror." And then like a week later, the building that they were in got blown up. So he was giving press releases from outside. Mm-hmm. He's like, "The Americans aren't in Baghdad." And meanwhile there are tanks rolling around behind him. Yeah. Like that's the image in my head when I read a press release from the IWF about taking the fight against drugs seriously.
I pulled up a meme, Google Baghdad Bob, and it says, "I guarantee that there are no Americans in Baghdad. Be sure."
Right. I guarantee you that we have a clean sport.
And it's an American flag behind them, marching.
Right. So, but even the IWF's response, the press release that they put on website, it doesn't all in the drug thing at all. It just
well. Let me reframe what I said then. There was a interpretation that the retest, it was like a hurrah. So nobody really looked at what the IWF was doing. We just assumed because WADA did the retest that was a part of it, and they were compliant and for clean sport. I will say this from a personal perspective of being at one of these meetings before. When you start talking about doping, the rest of the room goes to sleep. And it's a thing. They're like, this again kind of situation. So I could definitely see it being as trying to be an image of which they're really not.
Right. The problem now is that the IOC has said you can't go to sleep anymore.
Yeah.
And they slapped them across the face to wake up.
Yeah.
This leads the IWF backs them into a corner where they have to do something. And the questions now that are going to come out
what are the possibilities?
Or that they're going to have to address, or what do they have to do to prove to the IOC that they've actually taken steps? I mean, do we go to other sports and say, what have you done? If you look at what was it, wrestling that got kicked out, people couldn't believe that wrestling got kicked out of the Olympics. Mm-hmm. They eventually went back on their hands and knees and got put back in, but other sports came to the defense of wrestling.
Yes.
I haven't seen one thing in the, in the searching.
We're also like
nobody's helping out here. Nobody's defending weightlifting.
Yeah. I mean, the defense of wrestling it's an original Olympic sport. I think it was before the modern Olympic Games, and so the argument there was like, you take away wrestling, you don't have an Olympics. Nobody's going to bat for weightlifting. You're completely right. And
so now they've got to hopefully establish between now and the end of the year. Actions have been taken, whatever that is. And then even if that satisfies the IOC, we're not getting our weight class back for 2020.
So before we go into what are the possibilities and what's going to happen and what we think the IWF could do and all these events leading up to it, let's step back and let's talk about gender equality for a second. The gender equality situation is everybody was, I think for the most part, most people were genuinely okay with women having the equal amount of weight classes as men. It's been a long time coming, and it seemed like a great thing to do. It should have been done a lot sooner. It's a great weight class, I believe, that, sorry, some women have missed out on before, who would have been great. And now to balance gender equality, we lose 25 slots. I mean, 25% of our lifters.
Well, think about the implication. So by creating that gender equality, what you did was instead of you had 8 men's weight classes, 7 women's, whichever it was. Now you have 8 and 8 as of right now. But what that means is you have the requirement or the ask of 3 more medals and additional spots at the Olympics to accommodate that new weight class. Mm-hmm. This is at a period of time where the IOC is saying the Olympics has grown too big, and they're not just pushing on us, they're pushing on other sports to reduce head counts.
Okay.
So with the disfavor that weightlifting, I think, is in right now, it was very easy to slap.
Yeah.
And I keep using that word. It was very easy to hit weightlifting with a reduction as opposed to an addition.
Yeah.
And it's hard for weightlifting to defend itself. But what it creates now inside the sport is a problem of everybody just went around over the last year talking about how we've grown or how we're going to, change to new body weight classes, new records, etc. Now, what do? Do you drop lowest weight classes? Do you blend? Do you keep the 8 and 8 that we have outside of the Olympics, but then when you get to 2020, change it somehow? You know what I mean? But that has different implications for qualifying procedures. That becomes a new mess because if you're working on the 16 weight classes that we have now leading into the Olympics, how do you determine what the weight classes would be at the Olympics?
Yeah, that is a good question. I mean, I saw some talk about, like the men's 69 and 77, but I think this is a situation. If anything happened, we want to keep the sport, right? Number one. So we'll do what we can to like change up weight classes if that's the IWF's decision. And I think also it's a if you plant them, they will grow kind of situation where if like that weight class is no longer available, you move up or you move down. And that's the simple fit to keep the sport.
And by the way, this totally overshadows, because right now we're about ready to begin the week of, as we're having this conversation, the week of the Junior Worlds starting. And I believe a special Congress will be held there to address this stuff. But one of the other threats or one of the other things to be concerned about is a knee-jerk reaction as part of this need to appease the IOC. Will we now start really hammering on sanctions?
Well, that's a good question because by turning a blind eye to things for so long, we've piled up a bunch of stuff under the rug there. Excuse me, I had to catch myself. We've piled a bunch of garbage in the closet, and now what do we do?
Right. So people are going to have to accept that heavier sanctions and heavier sentences are going to be part of this, but I hope they don't just start really, really clamping down on everything. You know what I mean? In terms of, I think using monetary fines as a form of metering out discipline when people get popped is ridiculous. That doesn't work. But at the same time, I don't want us to start moving to one and done. Like you had mentioned a long time ago in an episode that we had done. If you get suspended for something, you're out forever.
Yeah.
That might be a little too strong. But where I'm a little worried is that they're going to have to react. They're going to have to react quickly. And do we all of a sudden start metering out really harsh punishments to people? And that could be disastrous in a different way.
Yeah.
This is not good. I mean, it's not the end of the world. I don't think we're doomed, but it's not good.
So let's talk about what we think what the new weight categories mean and what they could be. I mean, it seems like we're coming back to a time from the early 90s where they're shuffling the weight classes around again. And everything is washed away and made new,
I mean, it's just too speculative. The only thing I do think we can assume is that they're probably going to raise the bottom of the classes. So I think you're going to tick up from 56 to something.
Yeah.
And I think you might tick up from 48 to something else. You know what I mean? Like that's the only thing I'd be willing to venture.
I think so because those are the smallest weight classes as far as participation goes. Definitely hard.
Yeah, particularly on the men's side.
Yeah, definitely. It's a growing weight class on the female side. But yeah, I could definitely see that, and I don't think anybody on that level would argue about that cut. You know, somebody who trains at maybe like 60 or even higher, or it won't be too bad as long as my thing is just keeping the sport. It's too early to speculate over the weight classes. Let's discuss the IWF elections that happened recently and how these play into, you know, the current event.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting that this news happened on the heels of that election. So it almost feels like they were waiting. Granted, I think the IOC meeting where the Olympic program was released was scheduled anyway. So it's not like the entire IOC was waiting for this, but the timing is very interesting.
Yes.
Ion held on for another run, but he had been part of his, I'll put it this way, part of his platform had been the fact that he was so tightly ingrained and enmeshed in the IOC. To get a hit this hard, I don't know if the fact that Ion is there is what saved us at all, meaning that if Ion would have lost and we would have had an entirely new administration, would the IOC have turned around and just said, you guys are out altogether, get your house in order?
That's some higher level, higher power stuff, man. That kind of scares me. Any other things with IWF elections that are relevant to the situation as far as maybe in the U.S.?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think we had 3 or 4 people elected to positions. You know, it seemed like USA was gaining some ground and authority within the IWF, but yikes, it's the timing now with this news.
It's bad timing. I mean, the sport is booming in America and it's growing. Yes, but with growth comes more chaos, more checks and balances, more systems to have in place, bigger staff, bigger meets, more personnel, and there's likely to be more people doping.
Which creates a good transition. Here in the U.S., it's interesting. This week, I think we announced 4 drug pops.
Yes.
Looking at them, it's really interesting. I mean, there's some, I think, wide disparity over some of this, particularly there were 3 of them that came out on the same day.
Yes.
All of them were 4-year suspensions, and all of them were for wildly different things. You know, first one we saw was an Ostarine hit.
Yes.
That was Tyler Moore. I think Ostarine, by the way, if you haven't seen it, you're going to start seeing a lot more of it. It's a drug that bodybuilders figured out years ago, but it seems to be becoming more and more popular in other sports. I don't think it's a SARM. It's not anabolic, but it's the most anabolic of the SARM qualification of drug. That just the simplified way of describing its benefit is that you can bulk while you're on this drug and you can maintain your growth gains while you're actually cutting weight, which makes it a perfect drug. So I think you're going to see more and more use of this and more noise about this drug in the days ahead.
Yeah.
And there was one lifter that got caught on it, 4 years. That sort of makes sense to me.
Well, there wasn't just one. That was
actually
you mentioned Tyler Moore, but there was a Kelly Brianne Dykes who is well, and her sanction is interesting because she got caught in March. March the 16th.
8 years. Why is she 8 years?
So in March the 16th, she gets sanctioned for Clan Ostarine, and then in June she gets 8 years for just Ostarine.
She got hit twice?
She got hit twice. And we checked the date. We thought it was I thought it was a typo, or, you know, they made a mistake on the website. But these are 2 separate cases. It was 4 years here in September.
Oh, I see it.
So in September.
Yeah, so look at it. So it was an out of competition in February.
An out of competition.
She may not have had the results back, went to a meet in March.
Yes.
Yeesh.
So she got popped out of competition and in competition.
But they were different drugs.
Yeah. Yeah. Like
all
loaded.
Right, so that makes it 2 sanctions for each.
Yeah. And that's 12 years total.
No, it's 8.
No. Is that an update? That's what I was asking. She's on here twice. She gets a 4-year suspension, and then the next one is 8. Are those 2 different suspensions, or is that
I don't know if they're consecutive.
Yeah, is that 8 years total, or is that 4
know.
years and now you get 8 years, and we're going to take that off the website?
I don't know. Either way.
Either way, in and out of competition. I think that. Do you think that's not to speculate, but do you think this is a quick answer to the recent issues or news that we're trying to, you know, not just slap people on the wrist, but really lay down some tough sanctionings?
I don't know how 4 come out at once. It's interesting, the timing.
Yes.
But
It's like
Another one.
it's like we were holding these cards and we wanted to play them when we needed to, right?
Yeah, it's almost like it gets hidden behind, but they released these in advance of the IOC thing happening. So it's weird. The other two were really interesting stories. Kyle Dostershil got popped. It looks like, I mean, 4 different substances.
Yeah.
And he got a 4-year ban. It looks like the basis of his case, I mean, he got tested at the Arnold in 2016. It's over a year.
Yeah.
But the holdup, it looks like, on him was that he was fighting
The case.
not the contents of the drug tests, but who had the jurisdiction over the decision on the suspension. So he was actually arguing
That I was at the Arnold, an untested event?
No, he was arguing that the Arnold was an IWF event and that testing was done by USADA, not by USADA, but by WADA, and that USADA did not have jurisdiction to...
USADA doesn't have jurisdiction in the U.S.
It didn't have jurisdiction
At that meet?
on that specific test in that specific meet, and that he wasn't aware of USADA's involvement or how they could be involved based on what the entry blank said and all this other stuff. So it was, let's put it this way, it was a procedural fight inside the document.
I will say this: I've gotten off on a speeding ticket from a cop who was out of his jurisdiction by a mile. So I understand where you're going here, Kyle. But
but he blew pot on 4 drugs.
Come on, it's like, let's be serious here.
So or 3, whatever. It was one of those things where it looked like he was trying to make a backdoor exit from this, and he got shut down.
Yeah.
The arbitration board that heard it
Not happening.
did not accept the argument, and they ultimately ruled in favor of USADA. So he's out. Now the last one was the one that really sort of scared me in reading. And it looks like Mike McCool got suspended 4 years.
Oh, yeah.
For possession. It doesn't say anything about a test. It doesn't say anything about testing positive, in or out of competition. He admitted possession.
I think of, and let's look at, street drugs. You're caught with possession. They always slap
usually not good intentions.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So your possession, let's go ahead and just say with the intent to use or distribute. Which one do you want to do? You want the 12-year for distributing or the 4 for using?
All right, but that's criminal law and criminal investigation. This is clean sport.
Yeah.
So
you're saying
I'm going with the worry.
It's not illegal to possess the drug. It's illegal to use.
Depending on the drug, it is in fact illegal to have.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was going to say some drugs you can't have.
But there is the issue of in the court of law, self-incrimination.
Yes.
I mean, and if he admitted to something, I don't understand why he would admit it. But if you say, I had it, but I didn't use it, I threw it away. Why?
Why would you have it if you weren't going to use it?
Well, but you didn't test positive for it.
Why would you tell it? Why would you incriminate yourself?
I don't know, but you didn't test positive for it, and that's what I go back to. So
he should have. Let's
having
yes, he shouldn't have gotten 4 years. I will say that he shouldn't have.
That's where I'm going with this.
Admitted, because there are people who admitted and were tested, 3 times and so forth, and still went to the Olympics.
It looks like, stated flatly, I mean, it looks like he got made an example of, because I've never seen this before. And even if it is one of the rules that's written into our, drug code, into USADA, that you can't be in possession of something, I get it.
Yeah.
But 4 years seems like a pretty hard shot.
When it comes down to it, it's very objective. It's like, are you taking drugs or you're not? Or you're in possession of drugs or you're not. When it comes down, I think it's a case-by-case situation. And at the end of the day, do you want it that way, JP? Do you want to get hit with the book, or do you want hear me out in my situation?
Look, I believe everybody should be heard out in whatever their situation is, because you never know. But I mean, we're talking about a situation that's always been tricky in terms of drug testing. We're talking about a sport that doesn't have the best history in terms of adjudicating drug tests. And I am going back to the IWF on this, where, I mean, Jesus, it's 21 years ago where Petrov got off the hook for saying his jilted ex-girlfriend slipped steroids into his drink prior to the Olympics. Which, by the way, he went on to win. We've had some spotty adjudication of hearings. Mm-hmm. That's not USADA. Believe me, I know that difference. But even USADA is not exactly the cleanest, pardon the pun, of agencies,
of course,
with their own history of doing things. And that's why I look at this Nakul suspension, and I'm just not cool with it. I'm not comfortable with it. I think it's
You think
sort
it's a
of
bit
messy.
harsh? A bit harsh, definitely
It's
so.
messy. The other two I get. All right, Osterine's a bad drug. I mean, we have to be careful about Ostarine because, like I said, I think it's the new drug of fashion. So you're going to see more and more of that. And then, the other guy, Doster show, there were multiple drugs in there. So you got to have, I think a 4 year is appropriate there. But
Yeah.
I'm sort of repeating, but I just, it all looks wrong to me. And
Well,
I don't know the exact, yeah.
I want to go back to one lifter who I did a little bit of reading up on, and it's Kelly Brienne Dykes. Her situation is quite interesting because this is when her situation is a situation in which it will. It's not you getting popped, you doing drugs, you getting popped or getting a sanction on your own. This is when it actually, and I think all cases do, but this one is a very direct case where it affected another lifter. So
How so?
Kelly,
Well, I mean, there's metal in places on everything.
yeah, exactly. So, well, Kelly goes and she competes. She's a sophomore at the time at Georgia Southern University, and she won the George Flanagan University Scholarship for a weightlifting meet. So she wins the scholarship. She beats out another girl for the scholarship just by a few kilos. She basically takes this scholarship that pays her school. I think it was a semester of school. Yeah, tuition for an entire semester. You know how upset I'd be if I found out, if you were like my teammate or something like that, and you qualify for university, and then you get popped later, that you beat me for a scholarship that
Oh, if that's been paid, that opens an entire.
come on, does she pay that money back? Does the university know about it? Who goes forward with this? Does the parent? If I was a parent, I would go after it. My son or daughter lost a scholarship to somebody who was doping.
I've never even heard of this. That's interesting.
So I have the article here. PR Law, Georgian Southern female weightlifter wins Flanagan scholarship.
All right, so then we'll post that along with the other notices that we're talking about in some of the articles that we're peeking at in this conversation.
So that's when a situation gets into like, okay, I get it. Because at first, for me, it was like, oh, somebody's doping, they get caught, they get banned, they get fined, their health is at risk later in life. That's on them. But now I can see from a parent or coaching perspective, yeah, a medal is definitely, come on. If I lose out on a bronze and then 12 years later, I'm like this dad with a, car salesman kind of job, and I could have really got some, Dancing with the Stars at the least by winning the bronze in my country. And I missed out on some opportunities for some sponsorships and so forth with Nike or something like that.
Dancing with the Stars.
Yeah. and then I'm upset. What if I win a bronze in weightlifting? What am I really going to get? Good Morning America, something like that. But seriously here, she beat out a lifter for a scholarship. Has she paid that money back?
I think you go after it.
I would as a parent.
All right. So let's wrap this up. I mean, just to put a button on it, here's the bad, obviously, with the reduction with drugs and weightlifting, particularly in the U.S. What's bad about the timing on this is that at the exact moment where we've unveiled an initiative to grow the sport and reach out to youths and do the camp thing, any parent who does a simple search can probably come across this information, and that might be a black eye. That's not great. I don't know that it's a death strike, but it's not great.
Yeah.
The other side of it is, if we look at it from a positive perspective, I would rather have this news now than a year and a half or 2 years from now, because at least there is an opportunity to cure the problem. At least there is an opportunity to address it, and we can sort of heal from it, as opposed to become the new cycling in the world. Yeah. Which I don't want to be. Yeah. You know what I mean? As a sport. So we've got time to make the ship right, but we're really walking on a tightrope right now.
Who knows what's going to happen? And one thing that I take away from, the global state of the situation is that, I mean, it's not just Russia. A lot of coaches have been pushing Russia. And it's in our own backyard, as well.
I think for follow-up on this and for the best way to keep informed on what is going to happen or what happens next, we mentioned that the IWF Junior World Championships are coming up.
Yeah.
Keep an eye on that. That is still going to be a great meet and a very important one, particularly for the U.S., where we may not be back in 2018.
Yeah.
because of the fact that it's going to be in the DPRK then.
Yeah.
So, for us here, it's important to watch this one, I think, but it's always a great meet. But the thing to keep an eye on in relation to this story, particularly the drug thing, is that we have to see what notes come out of their meetings there.
Yeah.
And that can give us an idea of what direction they're going to go in, potentially with the weight classes and so on. So we shall see.
So, stay tuned, people. This is interesting stuff, and thanks again for listening.